Hello, I'm Don Tapscott. I'm chairman of the Blockchain Research Institute, and I'm delighted to be presenting to this very important event today. The Blockchain Research Institute is the world's largest independent think tank, and we're investigating blockchain, digital assets, and this really the second era of the digital age. And Cardano, IOHK, is a member of the BRI, and we've very much enjoyed collaborating with them. Today I want to stand back a bit and talk to you about what's happening in this industry, and I'm going to introduce the concept of Decentralized Consortium funding, or DCF. And along with IOHK and the Boston Consulting Group, our institute has been collaborating to develop this concept. We believe that it's critical for the future of this entire industry. Now let's start with how the world views us. And especially after the crash of 2018, there's been a lot of cynicism about this whole thing. An analyst from Gartner said the blockchain will be nothing more than an add-on to ERP CRM. What's blockchain actually good for, says Wired, not, for now, not much. Warren Buffett talked about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies as being rat poison. This is quite typical of a new paradigm and a new innovation. But let me start by talking about what's really happening. What's the promise of this technology? What does it represent? And what's the state of the union? To do that, let me flash back and give you a little personal perspective. I wrote a couple of books in the 1980s that nobody read. I think my mother bought most of them. But I started writing some bestsellers in the early 1990s. Paradigm Shift in 93 was obviously a big book, and The Digital Economy in 94 was the first bestseller about the web and business. And I was asked 20 years later to write the anniversary edition of the book, and I had to reflect on where we've been. And it occurred to me that the digital age has really gone through a first era. We've had mainframes, mini computers, PCs, the internet, the web, the mobile web, social media, the cloud, big data. And now technology is infusing itself into everything. Billions and trillions of inert objects that become smart communicating devices. The physical world is being animated, the Internet of Things. We have technology that learns to do things that it wasn't programmed to do, and all the extraordinary technologies. And I found myself coming to a surprising conclusion that the foundation of this second era would in fact be the underlying technology of cryptocurrencies, or blockchain. And let me explain what we're doing here at this conference and why this is so important. Throughout the first era, we've had an internet. I was using the ARPANET in the 1970s. We've had an internet of information. But when I send you some information, like a PDF of this deck, which you're welcome to have, I'm actually not sending you the information. I'm sending you a copy, and that works great for information. But when it comes to assets, things of value, like money or securities or intellectual property or the data in our identities, or cultural assets like art or music, or even votes. A vote's an asset, something of value that belongs to somebody. When it comes to assets, copying those is a bad idea. You don't want someone copying your vote or your ID, and if I send you $1,000, it's really important that I don't still have the money, right? So the way that we solve this problem, it's called the double spend problem by cryptographers, is through intermediaries: banks, government, credit card companies, transfer agents, stock exchanges, now social media companies, and they perform all of the business and transaction logic for every type of commerce. They identify the asset, that's a dollar, they clear and settle transactions, they keep records, and overall they've done a pretty good job. But there are growing problems. They exclude a couple of billion people from the global economy. They're centralized. It means that they can be hacked. It takes too long. Why does it take 4 to 7 days for a housekeeper in Toronto to send money to her mom in the Philippines? And why she charged 20%? And overall, they capture our data. That means that we can't use it to plan our lives. We can't monetize it, and our privacy is being undermined. So what if there were an internet of value? some kind of vast global distributed ledger where anything of value from money to securities to votes could be managed, stored, transacted in a secure and private way. That's what Satoshi did. He cracked the double spend problem, and for the first time ever, we now have a native digital medium for value, where anything of value can be managed, stored, transacted, and where trust is not achieved by an intermediary. It's achieved by cryptography, collaboration, and some clever code. So this is the trust protocol, an internet of value. That's what we're building today, and that's what we're involved in creating. Now, I had an analogy for why blockchain was a much more secure platform than traditional computing systems. But John Oliver got a hold of my analogy on late night TV and had some fun with it. So I'll just play you a little clip. You'll see why I don't use the analogy anymore.
And because of the complicated process the network uses to verify records, it is very secure. Now relax. I'm not going to get into what that process is or how it works, but I will share a really helpful, really dumb metaphor for why it is safe.
The way I like to think of it is that a blockchain is a highly processed thing, sort of like a chicken McNugget. And if you wanted to hack it, it'd be like turning a chicken McNugget back into a chicken. Now, someday someone will be able to do that, but for now, it's going to be tough.
Hold on. That is an absolutely horrible thought. So why is that reporter so happy about the idea? Because if anyone ever figures out how to turn a chicken McNugget back into a chicken, that chicken is going to be up. He's going to spend the rest of his life suffering from PTSD and writing haunting poetry about the experience. The things I saw, buck, buckaw. My body is whole, but what of my soul?
So you can see why I don't use the analogy anymore. I still think it's a good analogy. Anyway, what was Bitcoin? Bitcoin was just the first app of the Internet of Value. But then, do you remember what the first app of the Internet of Information was? It was email. But with the web, we had a general purpose platform to build any app. And now we have general purpose platforms to build any app that are coming out on blockchain. So the first up, big one was Ethereum. And we now have Cardano that you all know about. And Cardano has now implemented a smart contract platform. So this creates a whole new platform to transform any business in any industry. And we're in the early days of this. So the promise is a huge one. We described this in Blockchain Revolution in 2016. There's a new edition of the book out now, and the book holds up extraordinarily well. But one of the things that we said is that this is the early days of a profound change to the corporation. Let me explain that because it's quite critical to the topic today. It was back in 94 that I discovered this guy, Ronald Coase, and it was 80 years ago or more. He wrote a paper posing a deceptively simple question. He said, why does the firm exist? He said, if Adam Smith is right, and the open market's the best mechanism to allocate goods, resources, materials, and so on, why isn't everybody an independent contractor at every step along the way in production? Why do we have firms, corporations? And he said the answer is, and won a Nobel Prize for saying this, the answer is transaction costs. And he described that broadly. He said the cost of search, of finding people or money or resources in an open market, this would be prohibited. So we bring it inside the boundaries of a firm where things like filing cabinets and org charts and so on. The cost of coordination. Imagine trying to get all these people to do something that had never met. Bring them inside the firm where we have reward systems and organizational structures and so on. The cost of contracting. If every little activity in the economy were a contract, that would be prohibitive. And overall, the cost of establishing trust. So throughout the 20th century, the firm and the way that we orchestrate capability in society was the industrial age corporation. It was hierarchical and it was vertically integrated. Henry Ford had within his boundaries of the Ford Motor Company, a power plant, steel mill, shipping company, glass factory. Why? Because the costs of transactions in an open market were greater than the cost of doing things inside the boundaries of the firm. Along came IT. And in 1993, in Paradigm Shift, I described the firm as becoming an extended enterprise. I said, technology is making the boundaries of the firm more porous. Then we saw the rise of the internet, and it further dropped transaction costs. Companies like Cisco unbundled. We saw the rise of outsourcing and so on. And now with blockchain, this is going to demolish transaction costs. And it means that we're moving to a much more decentralized model of value creation that is extraordinary and holds vast potential for wealth, for innovation, and prosperity. Now, in the book, when we wrote the book, Alex and I hypothesized, where could this go? And we said, could you have a business model that's highly automated on the one hand, and on the other hand was highly complex? And ultimately, could you have an organization with no people? It'd be a bunch of software, basically. And we called it the Distributed Autonomous Enterprise. And we said this could be quite extraordinary. It could solve problems that have plagued traditional command and control hierarchies for some time, like moral hazard, where the individuals in the management of the corporation don't act in the interests of the shareholders because they're rewarded for doing other things. Well, we almost didn't publish it because we thought this is such a wild idea, but we did. And a couple of weeks later, an organization was launched, many of you are familiar with, called the Distributed Autonomous Organization. It was a venture capital company, essentially with no people. It went out onto the market, raised tens of millions of dollars, and it set about its business. Did that through a crowdfunding campaign. Now, the ending is not a happy one because there was a flaw in the smart contract facility, and the thing, some hackers got in there and threatened to take out money. So the organizers had to shut it down. But this is extraordinary that this could even exist, and it points to how the world is changing. A decentralized organization with no people. You know, Bob Dylan, there's something going on here and you don't know what it is. Now, I'm going to take just 5 minutes and describe to you, each of these is a 1-hour talk. I'm going to describe to you how this is transforming industries overall as well. And it's just not true. People like Gartner are just wrong. We're studying 120 projects at the Blockchain Research Institute. And these transformations are not just pilots, there are huge changes happening to every industry. The first is money. Now, money is changing. We have self-organizing cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. There are corporate currencies like Facebook's DM. And there are central bank digital currencies being led by the Bank of China, DCEP, it's called, the Chinese central bank digital currency that threatens the US dollar as the currency of record around the world. This is happening. China is implementing this. The financial services industry is up for big changes. It's a Rube Goldberg machine like this one, a super complicated machine that does something pretty simple. You know, you tap your card in a Starbucks and a bunch of transactions go through half a dozen intermediaries, and 3 days later a clearing and settlement occurs. If that were on a ledger, on a blockchain, there would be no 3-day settlement period because the payment and the settlement would be the same activity, just be a change to the ledger. So we talk about the Golden 9. These are the things that this Rube Goldberg machine does. It authenticates and identifies value. You are who you are, that's $1. It stores it. It moves value around, payment systems and so on. It lends value. There's funding and investing of value, venture capital, hedge funds, mutual funds, private equity, and so on. It exchanges value, all kinds of market stock exchanges. It insures value, managing risk, assurance, reassurance, analyzes value. It's a big industry that does that, and accounts for value and audits for value. In theory, every one of these can be eliminated by software, essentially. Now, that's not going to happen because the banks are working hard to reinvent themselves. But this is a time of big change to the industry, and we're studying changes in every one of those areas. We're also going through the great digitization. Assets are becoming digital. And this is a taxonomy to talk about 8 types of cryptocurrencies, such as Bitcoin. There are protocol tokens. ADA is the protocol token for Cardano. There are governance tokens that essentially represent voting power on a blockchain project. They enable platforms to distribute power and rights to users in order to help them develop strategy, objectives, allocation of resources, and as a byproduct to remain decentralized. UNI is the governance token of the decentralized exchange Uniswap. Securities tokens is a huge one. All securities will become tokenized. There will be no stock market, stock exchanges, and investment bankers in the traditional sense. Natural asset tokens like tokenizing carbon and so on, many different types. NFTs, we talked about tokenizing cultural assets in blockchain revolution 6 years ago. That taxonomy is described in this book edited by Alex Tapscott called Financial Services Revolution. Supply chains, trains, boats, planes, trucks, all kinds of entities moving around. There's paper and EDI and phone calls and so on. Imagine if they were a shared network state, a single version of the truth, real-time transactions, visibility, and so on. And that notion is described in a new book edited and created by me called Supply Chain Revolution. Health, it's a big, complicated industry. Every part of it is being transformed by this technology. Property rights, 70% of land titles in the world are not enforceable. So the Haryana Land Registry in India is now putting land titles on a blockchain. And nobody can mess with them unless you know how to turn a chicken McNugget back into a chicken, Telecom, this is the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure, and exciting things happening there. Reliance Jio, one of the biggest mobile companies in the world, 300 million users in India, is delivering blockchain as a service to its customers. Energy, resources, and climate. Just yesterday, I was with Guild One at a big event on blockchain for the oil and gas industry, and it's a company that provides blockchain-based solutions for all kinds of peer-to-peer transactions, royalty calculations, and so on. Manufacturing. Boeing, or Moog, used to manufacture parts for Boeing and ship them out to the factory. Now they have additive manufacturing. They 3D print the parts in Boeing, and the transactions are managed under blockchain. Identity is a big problem. The virtual you knows more about you than what you do, because you don't remember what you spent a year ago or what you said or your location or what test you got or what medication you took. Except all this data is being captured by digital conglomerates, new species of business. We need to get our identities back so that we can manage them responsibly. And there's exciting projects underway on that. And then government, 3 classes of transformation that we're studying. Changes to the architecture and operations of government, strengthening democracy, and that sure needs to be done as there's a crisis of legitimacy, and reinventing central banks. So this is all happening. Now, what's the holdup? Why is this taking so long? Well, the first thing is that these are big, deep changes. You know, if you want to implement something with the Internet of Information, you go to Shopify. 2 days later, you're up and you're selling something online. With blockchain, we're changing the architecture of corporations and how we orchestrate capability in society to innovate, to create goods and services. We're transforming entire industries like supply chain. That's going to take a while. But the fact that this is taking time does not evidence the irrelevance of this technology. It evidences its importance. There are big technical problems. Technology having to do with scalability, interoperability, functionality, user interface. But these are changing, and they will. And this is evolving very, very rapidly. All the smartest people in the world, computer scientists, are working in this space. Blockchain has an image problem, and we got to work on that. And the one that I want to talk to you about today and end with, it's the challenge of governance. How do we steward this thing forward? How do we enable decision-making in these new decentralized worlds? Now, Alex Tapscott and I have been working on this for quite a while. And in 2016, after Blockchain Revolution came out, we brought together a number of leaders of the industry. Joe Lubin from Ethereum. We had Perry Ann Boring from the Chamber digital commerce. There was Brian Bellendorf there and his boss, Jim Temlin from the Linux Foundation. And we said, how are we going to make this thing happen? And we developed something called the Muskoka Group that created a number of principles and outlined a number of actions that needed to be done to move the ball forward. Now, at that meeting, a guy named Pinder Wong says profoundly, just because it's decentralized does not mean it needs to be organized. So when we're talking about governance of these platforms and protocols and digital assets and so on, we're not talking about government. And we're also not talking about control, au contraire. As Alex said, governance is not about government. It's not about control. It's about the stewardship of decentralized platforms and businesses by their stakeholders to define and achieve objectives. And furthermore, let's differentiate between the governance of this technology and use of this technology for governance, so-called on-chain governance. Both are important, but they're different, and they often get muddled. So based on the Muskoka Group, we did a number of things. First of all, we created a report for the World Economic Forum that introduced the concept of blockchain governance, and it was very widely received. Also, we created the Blockchain Research Institute because there was a big need for research on use cases and these problems. And our goal is really to link the potential and actual deployment of this technology. Now, as part of the work that we've been doing for the Decentralized Consortium Funding Initiative, I'd like to try and describe these different levels of governance. First of all, there's the issue of you need to fund a platform, typically done with ICOs, but most ICOs have not been effective. Many of them were fraud. But also, the funds either didn't get raised, or once they were raised, the platform was unsuccessful in governing itself, or it became centralized quickly. So how do we fund these platforms in a new model? And that's the first level. Funding them, and not just funding them, but deciding how resources will be allocated to achieve the objectives of the organization. More broadly, how do we govern? Funding is a subset of the broader issue of governance or stewardship of these platforms. Thirdly, we're not just governing platforms. Increasingly, the firm, the corporation, is changing, and there are new decentralized models of businesses. Now, the extreme example being something like the DAO, a distributed autonomous organization. And then overall, we're not just governing corporations, we're having to come together to rethink entire industries. So I was with the Blockchain and Energy. It's a consortium that's trying to rethink the oil and gas industry. BITA, Blockchain and Transportation Alliance. Fred Smith at FedEx, the CEO, says, blockchain is a team sport. You can't do it by yourself. We used to be able to do that, create a new system, put a FedEx logo on it, take it to market. You can't do that. We're changing entire industries now. So these are the four sort of levels that you can think about this. And just a couple of other points here. That rather than ICOs, we can have funds in Treasury. And this is not a theory. Uniswap has a $10 billion treasury. This treasury is not controlled by anyone. It's controlled by a decentralized group of shareholders. And its treasury is twice the size of Coinbase's cash balance. Coinbase is a gigantic company in a traditional centralized exchange. So it just shows how amazing this is happening. Uni is the governance token. And there are many issues that are posed by this that we're trying to tackle. Like here's one. How do you prevent voter apathy? It's kind of the same thing in a lot of governance systems. How do you encourage coin holders who are stakeholders and they control the governance tokens of a project to actually vote on key measures? And in the end, there's so little participation often that a handful of very large whales, big holders, end up governing the system. not unlike other governance systems where there are a number of wealthy individuals who control the outcomes. Well, there are all kinds of exciting new ways to think about that. One is to use prediction markets to determine policy. You kind of make it like a game. And this is something that's being done by the SSX network, where you basically make predictions on policy, and if your prediction comes true, then you're rewarded for that. So let me close by digging into this, introducing the DCF, or Decentralized Consortium funding. The goal here of our project is to revolutionize tokenized funding, to support the effective use of funding to achieve strategic objectives. That's really the goal. And to do that in a decentralized way. And also to build a program execution machine with built-in governance components. And the goal, obviously, is to mitigate power concentration through building these types of on-chain capabilities that get adopted over time. And this is not just about funding for a platform, but ultimately these new models can be used for all models of decentralized wealth creation. So if I go back to my pyramid, DCF addresses the funding, decentralized consortium funding of these platforms. But DCF is also at the heart of the overall governance of protocols and platforms. It ultimately can be applied to DAOs in general, or to more decentralized enterprises. And there's no reason why it can't also be applied in rethinking entire industries. This is a really exciting project, and I hope that you all will show a lot of interest in it. So let me close with a thought. When you get a new paradigm, these things cause confusion, conflict, uncertainty. Vested interests fight against change. And I'm old enough to remember things like Ken Olsen, who was the head of the largest computer company in the world, Digital Equipment Corporation, slightly bigger than IBM, who said there's no reason for an individual to have a computer in his home. This is the problem of paradigms. These things are mental models. They put boundaries around what we think. They constrain our actions. They're often based on assumptions that are so strong that we don't know that they're there. And leaders of old paradigms have difficulty embracing the new. How are we going to do this? How are we going to reinvent management theory for a whole new model of how we create wealth and innovate and solve problems in society? Everybody can get involved, and that's the exciting thing about this period. So let me close, if I may, by using an analogy for DCF. At the Blockchain Research Institute, we've been studying nature. Bees come in swarms, fish come in schools, starlings, different parts of the world, come in something called like in England, something called a murmuration. It's a word in the English dictionary. It refers to the murmuring of the wings of the birds. And starlings are out over a 20-mile radius throughout the day doing their starling thing. And at night they come together and they create one of the most extraordinary things in nature. And the murmuration has a function. It warms the birds up for the cold night ahead. It also protects the birds from predators. On the right of the screen here, you can see a predator, a hawk, 25 times the size of a starling, being chased away by the collective power of the little birds. And scientists that have studied this say they've never seen an accident. There's leadership, but there's no one leader. And when the moment is right, this magic happens. Now, is this some kind of fanciful analogy, or might we learn something about decentralized governance? This murmuration functions according to the principles of DCF that I've been talking about today. Remember, I said trust in a protocol is not achieved by a middleman. There's no middleman here. It's achieved by cryptography. There's some code in the DNA of the birds that gives it rules. Big rule is don't bump into anybody else. But another rule is don't get too far away. But I also said trust is achieved through collaboration. And the murmuration is a giant collaboration. A critical principle is interdependence, that the interest of the individual bird is connected to the interest of the murmuration as a whole, and that's the way that it functions. And another principle is integrity. Integrity, which is really the foundation of trust. So let me explain that. What is trust? What is trust? Trust is the expectation that the other party will act with integrity. Trust is the expectation that the other party will have value, they'll deliver good value, but also that they will have the values of integrity. They will do the right thing. They'll be honest, considerate of your interests, abide by their commitments, and be open. Which is why a little bird will chase a predator 25 times its size, because it trusts. It knows that the other birds will have its back. Now, this is a stimulus response network, but imagine if we could build in human cognition. What kinds of problems could we solve? And I get a lot of hope when I look at this thing, that if we built some vast network of glass and air and cryptography and code, and on that we build applications to transform every business, and we find new ways off-chain and on-chain to cooperate together to steward these resources and these new business models forward, then maybe this smaller, more decentralized world that my grandchildren inherit might actually be a better one. And this new age of networked intelligence would be an age where the promise of the digital economy is finally fulfilled. Join us, and thanks very much.